Welcome back to the MR Runningpains podcast. This is episode number 82, my conversation with coach and professional runner, an all-around good guy, Patrick Reagan. I have really looked forward to this conversation, and man, we went through a lot here. I'm really enjoying just talking with people because I always learn so much. I hope you do. Sincerely hope you enjoy this time and listening to what we have to say. If you have questions for either of us or comments, concerns, don't hesitate to reach out. Patrick is very active, obviously, on social media. I will link his website in the show notes, which will also have his contact. So, and the same for mine will be in the show notes. So thank you for being a part of this and listening. And here's my conversation with Patrick Reagan. I also was editing this podcast and just wanted to apologize. Apparently, as I was going through here, Patrick's recording kind of skips out a little bit. So my apologies for that. I'm not sure if that was a Wi-Fi issue because everything was fine during the recording as I watched the metrics, but apparently we had a little bit of issues. So my apologies for some dead space and for some of Patrick's interview having some omissions, but hopefully you can take away a lot from it still. All right, I'm here with my buddy and coach, Mr. Patrick Reagan. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Hey, Aaron. Nice to see you again. Thanks for having me on.
We are both a little groggy. Pat's just coming off of a little bit of illness, and I've been doing my typical get up at the wrong hour of the morning. So excuse us if we're a little groggy, but been looking forward to this conversation and catching up. Both of us have been all over the place, and it's nice to kind of just sit down and chat, man.
Yeah, it sure is. Both of us get up at the wrong hour of the morning. You really early, me a little too late. Seems to be the way of things, but
yeah, we gotta do what we gotta do.
That's right, man. That's right.
And so we had a number of things that we wanted to touch on today. Not sure where you want to start, but we can start with what you've been up to, and kind of let it flow from there. So why don't you give us a handle on what you've been doing, because you've been all over the map this year.
Yeah, sure have. It's been a strange year in terms of getting a late start after having a little injury in the winter that led me to not racing Carbon X, feeling like I was getting super fit and running 100 like 9 weeks before Western, not particularly knowing if Western would happen. Going through some patches there that I hadn't gone through in 100 before, still getting like muscling a finish and feeling pretty good about it. Getting to Western, having a rough high country, but still having a great day and being top 20. But
what was going on in the high country? Because a million things can go wrong in the high country, right? But what was going on up there for you?
Yeah, I had trouble with elevation this year. I think it was several different things coming together all at once. Based on blood work in the post, my ferritin was really low, lower than it has been like during my time as a professional runner. Another aspect, I think, was not being quite as fit as I was in 2019 for Western States, or quite as prepared as I was for the climbing in the high country in general. I wasn't as specific, given that most of my build into Western this year was more for jackpot, for a really flat loop and just basically training out my door as opposed to a lot of climbing. So that made for a super interesting high country. I almost felt as though once I got out of elevation that I had a really great run from Forest Hill to the finish. Even from right after Devil's Thumb to the finish, that final 50 miles was great for me. But once you get hours behind, it is what it is. As we all know, in hundreds, it's kind of a situation where you can only make up so much time, right? So those were probably the two most interesting hundreds I've ever run, right back to back. they also, on paper weren't my best in terms of the best times I've ever run in the 100. So it was interesting to go through that all at once, like during a global pandemic. It set me up for kind of a July where, I felt like I had to kind of like work on my mental health a lot of like, hey, you just had a couple bad races. You weren't necessarily like, this isn't the runner you are. They were just 10% off each, So that was super interesting to work through, Aaron, as an athlete, especially as a professional athlete, going through a time like that.
And are you being coached this year?
Only by myself, so only by the madman sitting right in front of you. Yeah,
that's fair. So, when you're going through this sort of thing, did you have people that you talk to, maybe people that have kind of been through something similar, or how did you deal with that?
Yeah. Ian Sharman and I were talking a lot about, jackpot. And then, we talked a lot, in post from Western States, because he saw so much of my race pacing me from essentially Bath Road, the last 40 miles to the finish. And we got to discuss how important like these two events were, that they weren't just smooth sailing. Like pretty much every 100 I had up to this point was smooth sailing. Whereas we thought that the jackpot was probably the most important experience I could have had in the build to Western States, because it gave me the ability that if something went wrong at States, I could fight through it. I could fight through those low patches and those tough times and push towards still getting a finish, right? Like, I mean, that's the whole thing with States is you respect the race. You do your best to get the buckle, as long as you're not gonna harm yourself, right? Or injure yourself even further. So in the build to States, we felt like that was what I had going for me. I didn't really have a huge climbing block or a really specific Western States training block, but I think that experience of a 100 where things weren't smooth sailing from gun to gun, like at USA's, and I rallied and came back, I could use that skill if it happened at Western States. And given that it happened, I knew that the low patch I was having in the high country, if I just trudged on and I kind of muscled through it, that things could come back. And they almost came back around to where I was M10. I was M11, but it was almost a scenario where I worked myself from, 25th male to potentially top 10 again. And that felt good, in relative terms, even though this year hasn't been probably my best year on paper. I think everyone would kind of look at the year and say, well, you're more like probably a top 5 to top 8 Western States guy. You can run or have run in the past with Zach at say USA's. Even though I didn't achieve those things, I felt good about this year and for other reasons, that I can still finish these things, maybe not at my fittest, and that I can finish with solid results, not at my fittest.
Yeah, absolutely. For those that haven't had a chance, Patrick did an episode on his own podcast, Tortoise and Hare. I'll have to look back at what episode it is, but I'll put that in the show notes, about his Western States experience. And he had his crew on there, which included Mike, his co-host, Ian, and was it I'm sorry, Camellia?
Megan, actually. Yeah, Megan came.
Megan, I'm sorry. So. Megan, that's right. Which was, a great insight into everything. Did you have a chance to kind of process States prior to the podcast, or was that still like super fresh and that was like first time of reflection?
I had about 3 weeks between States and the podcast. So I had a little time to process kind of how the day went, how I felt about the experience before we all sat down and chat. And Mike had used that cast as kind of a guide to a newcomer to States, someone that was, trying to get to know the course and the checkpoints and kind of your different important waypoints where you could see your crew. So we talked from both my perspective and the perspective of how Ian and Megan saw the course evolving, saw the race evolving, saw me going through low patches, and what we did to troubleshoot the tough times and the good times I was having on the course. to just keep me moving efficiently. So I had a little time to process at that point. Since I haven't had a race since States, I feel like it's been nothing but processing. Now I'm finally getting the fire back to train, and that feels good. Like not thinking about the race anymore is a good thing. So
Yeah. And you've had quick turnarounds in the past, like 100-miler to 100-miler. And but this one, you're coming off injury. You go to, a big race like Jackpot, and by big race, I mean, you've got a deep field with fast runners. You get through it, you fight through it, and then you have a quick turnaround to States. What was that like for your mental state? Were you okay to train?
So after every 100, I use Pam Smith's method of taking 10 days off after your 100, a day for every 10 miles. Right. And that's something that we try to do with your training too, Aaron, now, right? Is like, let's make sure we stay super patient, even though you recover incredibly well. So if you look at it and we say we have 8 weeks total, we lose 10 days off the bat, right? So we're looking at more like 6.5 weeks. Okay. But now we're looking at more like 4 weeks, including the taper, right? So we have 4 weeks to get in some specific work for Western States, which isn't your traditional build or your training block heading into it. My theory was that, we could prioritize Jackpot and get enough, treadmill power hiking and enough really specific stimulus in that 4 weeks to build into a really good Western States. I had a couple good weeks, like one good week leading into a mini Western States training camp that Chris Brown and me did the week before the traditional States camp. So that was 6 weeks out from the race. And we covered about, 90 X miles in 6 days on the course. It was great. But I remember coming back from that camp and having a really rocky 4 weeks of just super low volume and not feeling necessarily physically where I wanted to be or mentally, feeling like the fire was there for training. So those were a couple of the difficult points in aftermath following Western States training camp, where I maybe wanted to be at 75 or 80 miles, but I was running in reality more like 45 or 50 and not feeling like I was getting in the specific work. That was an interesting turn of events, because I thought, well, once I usually get through my first kind of 10 days following an event like Jackpot, and I'm trying to pivot into, say, 200 milers in 6 weeks or 200s in 8, I thought, yeah, everything will roll smoothly into the next training block. I think the difficulty was that the events were so different. And me and Zach Bitter had talked before Jackpot about me trying this crazy double. And he said, well, you've done it in the past with events like Javelina and Brazos, but I'd be hesitant because the events are so different. And I agree now that the events are so incredibly different. It's super hard to prepare for two events like that. Now, for a runner that's interested, in running at a high level and preparing for something like Jackpot and Rocky Raccoon or Jackpot in Umstead, right? Those are super feasible because there's, say, an 8-week spread between maybe Jackpot and Umstead, but the events are quite similar in terms of it's a reasonable amount of gain at Umstead, really runnable terrain for the most part. Surface is similar, at least in sections. Even if you have a little single track, it's a lot of that wider dirt road type running. You can simulate in the block leading into an event like Jackpot, if you're training for Umstead, a little bit of vert and then concentrate on a little bit more vert following Jackpot. Whereas if you're training for something like Jackpot on your way into Western States, I'm not sure I'd recommend an 8-week spread. They're just so incredibly different. You could pull it off if it was Jackpot and Javelina or Jackpot and Brazos. But I think the events are just a little too different. Unless you had a really long buildup where you did a good portion of the elevation gain and loss before you got to an event that's that flat.
Right on. I mean, it's tough to imagine, for a lot of people having kind of a mental slump, going into Western. The what was what kind of helps you to keep going? What mental strategies did you use to kind of get the work in, and was it did you put the pressures on yourself? Were there any outside pressures? Because you have a lot of different people that watch you, obviously. So you've got like obviously a great social media presence. So people are watching you there. You've got sponsors, and you've got your own motivations, and how did you kind of cope with all of that and deal with it and keep moving forward?
I think I've been pretty bad at putting an amount of pressure on me that, say, my sponsors or friends or loved ones don't put on me. But I try to hold myself to a really high standard, and I think it bit me in the butt a little bit this year, right? I'm trying to get better at managing that. Whereas I chose my sponsors for a really specific reason and stuck with the sponsors I have for a really specific reason, because they supported me for 5, 6, 7 years now through like crazy injuries, through really great races, through times like now where, in all honesty, my managers have been like, Patrick, if you need to take 6 months of just training and not racing and just come out to events and pace and support, that's great. That's why I chose like the sponsors I have, right? So most of the pressure doesn't necessarily come from sponsors by any means. If it became a pattern for years and they saw that, my running was going awry for years, it would be different. But I think personally, I think too much about that, right? Like I think too much about, oh, well, that was 2 like races I'm proud of, but that aren't up to my standard in a row. And I think that gets in my head a little bit as a runner. And I think many of us have that, right? Where you're used to a certain standard of racing and you have maybe 2 or 3 bad ones in a row, or ones that aren't up to your standard. And you maybe put undue pressure on yourself heading into the next one. I think a good thing to do as an athlete in general is when you feel that undue pressure, whether it's an external source like your boss or whatever, pushing you to focus on the process, right? And for me, I think this year I maybe lost sight of that a little bit, of just focusing on the process of, okay, I had an injury in January. If I would have just come back with a clean slate and not been in such a rush to prepare for a couple key events, I think I'd have been in a much better state in the aftermath of Western States, right? Whereas no one was expecting me to come back super fast from an injury other than myself. All the pressure I'd say I put that was on me this year was internal pressure. So as an athlete, I'm trying to get better at managing that. And I would suggest that to others too, that if you have something that's holding you back, whether it's an injury or a lack of motivation, instead of just signing up for a race immediately and saying, okay, that's 8 or 9 weeks away, the better thing to do is probably to just start to think about the training process again. If you have a coach, sit down and say, hey coach, like how many weeks do you think we need to, based on where I'm at, to put me in a good position to line up for a race again? And that can be from a mental standpoint. That could be from a physical standpoint. And I think that I maybe had given myself too tight of a timetable heading into something like Jackpot. Whereas I was really excited and the training ball was rolling in the right direction again, but it was a bit of a rush,
Yeah. Yeah. And that happens.
Sure.
I mean,
yeah. I think to you coming off of Old Dominion this year, Aaron, and I think, wow, we got this cool opportunity to run Hard Rock, right? How could we turn it down? And we could draw parallels there between USA's for me in April and Western States. How could I turn down running Western States even if I was not feeling quite myself? I knew that it would be a really valuable experience for me, right? And you knew it would be a valuable experience for you, even if it took you 47 hours and 30 minutes,
Absolutely.
right? That would have maybe been even, well, not cooler because it would have been a lot more time for you out there, and it wouldn't have been up to your standard. But you remember those experiences the most, right? The ones where it doesn't go incredibly well in the long term. But I think in the short term, the hard thing for us as athletes, Aaron, is remembering, okay, that's not up to my standard. That's not exactly the athlete that I am. But hey, oi.
That's oi. Hi, oi. Cute.
Yeah, well.
No worries.
Well, hey,
we'll
welcome to the
Oi to the podcast
Oi.
too.
Could you be quiet? That'd be nice. But the important thing is for us to remind ourselves that that's not the athlete we are. That's the experience we had on the day, right? It's easier for us to talk about that kind of thing as coaches rather than to give ourselves self-talk, though, right? It's much more different. I think it's easier for me to tell an athlete, well, hey, like, I understand your goal was 23:30. You wanted to really break 24 hours. I know it took you 29, but look, you'll remember that experience. And when you have an external source telling you that, great. But when you're in just your own mind and you're thinking about that experience and it's not up to your standard, it's a little more difficult. Especially if in a way, and we talked about this prior to the episode, it's like, what are these pressures as a professional athlete? Well, you think about things like, I ran 15:54 at Western States in 2019. I ran 19:30 this year. It's hard to disconnect from that a bit. There's part of me that it's hard to disconnect from that. Mm-hmm. There's also part of me that says, hey, quit your pissing and moaning. People have been entering Western States for 8 years and don't get pulled in the lottery. Like, trudge on and get yourself a silver buckle. I don't care if it's 19:30 or I don't care if it's 23:45. I told myself that prior to the race, for sure. I mean, I even had sat with Luis Escobar on his podcast, Road Dog. And I said, if it takes me 26 hours, it takes me 26 hours. I mean, that'll be a different experience. I don't have a bronze buckle yet, So I think that if you can, and if you're not so banged up and injured, that you can't finish, no matter if you're an elite runner, you're mid-pack and you're disappointing yourself in terms of your goals, try to finish the damn thing. That's key to me. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I agree. And, I think the other piece of it too, is when we talk about social media, and being vulnerable, a lot of times we paint such a rosy picture on social media, that, everything's peaches and cream, and I mean, I was honest on social media about why am I having a, about, Virginia race.
Old Dominion. Yeah.
Old Dominion. It was, I don't know why I couldn't get that out of my head. But I just said this, things happen beyond my control. I even had people reach out to me that said, I didn't understand what you were talking about, having a panic attack and not being able to until I've experienced something similar. So, I mean, it's when we talk about our, not necessarily our failures, but, lack of success, in events, in training, and kind of let people see it doesn't always go according to plan, it happens to all of us. I think that's a better thing and a more teachable moment than, when we post, about the good things that happened, so, I mean, if you, I see you very active, with your posts on Instagram and Facebook and sharing your experiences. And I think this can be valuable lessons as well. And you put, things in there that, are working for you and stuff like that. So I certainly appreciate your social media presence. And that you're open about things on Strava as well. Because a lot of, athletes hide those things, or don't share their training. But you're very open about it, and you're open to conversations. So in that way, I think you're very relatable and and also obviously a wealth of knowledge. So,
well, thanks. Yeah.
thank you for
Aaron,
sharing
those
all
are
that.
important teaching moments to me. And as someone that's an athlete and a coach, and lately I've been feeling more like a coach, given that I haven't felt my best this year. It's kind of important to me to show people that, like, hey, I put all my training on Strava, and you saw me average 15 miles a week for the 6 weeks after Western States, because I'm human too, like everything you see on there is everything I do,
Totally.
basically, at all times, here or there. I won't put a mobility routine or something up, but it's important to show athletes and, other athletes in the sport that I'm human, and it doesn't take necessarily a perfect, beautiful training block of 100 plus miles a week to nail 100. Some of my best hundreds have come off the back of barely averaging 75 miles a week between big 100 doubles, right? I think back to how much I surprised myself, for example, at, say, Brazos Bend, Aaron, where really that year after Western States, I'd done 2 quality sessions heading into Javelina. I did no quality sessions between Javelina and Brazos Bend, faster, more leg speed type work. I did a few weeks above 100 miles a week in that entire 5-month training block, but I nailed 200s. How does that happen? Well, I think part of it is your mentors and where you're coming from in terms of your huge aerobic base heading into a training block like that. But I think you can also show others that it doesn't have to be 100 miles a week to 150 miles a week, like some pros, all the time to nail 100. It's not absolutely necessary. I think it goes back to hundreds are 80% mental and 20% physical. And if you have a good solid fitness base and you've practiced, you're really good at metabolizing calories, you have a really good plan for keeping the core temperature low all day, you can nail 100. I coach athletes that are not able to crest 45 miles a week but nail hundreds. How is it possible? Well, it comes down to a deep desire to want to do it. You need a solid fitness base to run these things at a high level. But I think more importantly, if we look to mentors and people in our sport that have had a lot of longevity, if we look at Carl Meltzer, hardly ever runs over 60 miles a week, right? But does what he does at the 100-mile distance. He's been that way his whole career. If we look at Ian Sharman or Jeff Browning, they rarely do a 100-mile week, right? If we look at Pam Smith or Megan Canfield, they put in their big weeks, right? But they also can nail hundreds running off of 70 to 75 miles a week at a very high level, right? So I think it's important to educate runners in our community, ultra runners that are newer to it, that you don't have to do more than what you did when you were a marathoner or a high level collegiate athlete or whatever background you're coming from. It's so much more about different types of specificity, practicing things like we do on long runs, Aaron, right? How much do we talk about nutrition specifically on long runs and the importance of practicing that?
Right.
That's far more important than I ran a 42-mile long run instead of a 28.
Right. Yes, because it's the whole block, looking at the big picture. And when experienced runners come to me for coaching and I look at what they've done and the results and, how they felt or how it went, I say, well, you did a lot and you may not need all of this. And when we pull back and they feel good and they're surprised by the result because we took away so much volume, but at the same time, we've made them feel better overall and we've been consistent over, many weeks. That's the reality, is the consistency over time and having that aerobic capacity, to complete it. And it's the same thing with, a new to ultra running, their first 100-mile. They see these, cookie cutter plans. And I mean, when they show me what they were going to do, I'm like,
right.
I don't know if you would make it to the line. I can't see, doing that much. And that's, my episode that came out actually last week, or when this comes out, it would be last week's episode. I talked about that. It's just, that you are an experiment of one. And we have to find what works for you. How much volume can your body tolerate without being too fatigued? And, as you said, we have to put in all of the right things. We have to add specificity for the event. We have to train the gut, but it's finding what works for you, because what works for somebody, just because you read about what, any of the pros did, that may not be what works for you. Your gut is completely different. Your body is completely different, and how it will take on those adaptations are what we have to figure out. So just following a cookie cutter plan may not be the best option. And, there's plans out there that, obviously can work for people, but it's
one of the things specifically you said is consistency over time. And that's the most important part. For me, that's personally what's been lacking for me this year is consistency over time. You get in 4 good weeks, something comes up, right? Get in 3 good weeks, something comes up. And I think that the more consistent you are over time, whether it's your quote unquote usual workload and your usual volume or not, you're finding ways to adapt and become stronger at what you're able, what your current body, what your current time allotment for training is allowing you to get in. So it's not even necessarily I'm trying to mimic training blocks I've done in the past. It's that this is the time I currently have to train, and I'm trying to use it as efficiently as possible and get the most out of it. There's a great advisor I had years ago had always said, okay, Patrick, like, I'm looking at your training and you're running 110 miles a week and you work 60 hours a week. To me, that's like running 170 miles a week. I count every hour of work as an extra mile in terms of stress. It's probably a little too much. Let's back it off a bit, And it's those kind of moments where those are teaching moments, and you think about those things. So now when I'm working with working professionals, I'm like, hey, look, you work 60 hours a week and we cover 60 miles a week. That's kind of like a pro kicking their feet up and running 120 miles a week. We've got to be careful with that. So it's important to recognize where you're coming from as an athlete in terms of other demands on your life. Like, you want to get in enough training, but you would rather it be consistent for many weeks and make it to the starting line than overdo it for 3 or 4, deal with injury in the 3 weeks approaching the race and feeling like you're rolling the dice on race day of whether you can even start the race or not, right?
Yes. Yeah. It comes down to realizing what the body's capable of doing, with all of that stress in there. Some people worry about how much time they get or how many miles they get in the long run. But the reality is, if you get to your Saturday or Sunday long run and, the body's just not willing to go that distance, you need to be okay with just cutting it back and saying, like, this is what I had today. And, because that's what the body can give. Beyond that, you're creating too much fatigue that, we're going to have to recover from and lose training time from. So we have to be careful on that and things and keep the balance, between how much fatigue we're creating and how much training stimulus we're providing. So, so thank you for all those pointers. It's
collective too. It's from both of us, right? We're bouncing these ideas as coaches, as athletes off each other. I mean, between us, how many years of running experience do we have? And we both love sharing that experience. That's an important part of it for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I had an interesting conversation here, and I'd love to hear your perspective, because I have a gentleman he's an older runner, has experienced a tremendous amount, and his worry is that if he doesn't have a goal or a box to check, he's just going to quit. And kind of call it, because and like I said, he's done tons, and he has a goal. It's out there, which is good. We're moving forward, but do we sometimes rely too heavily upon goals to make us get out there? Is there something to be said that, like, we need to make sure there's joy and enjoyment, because, like he said, if he doesn't have this goal, he feels like he's just going to quit. So are we doing it for the right reasons? What's your
I think I've always trained a little more effectively when there's some sort of goal on the horizon in terms of a race. And it's difficult difficult to get in the regular training for me personally when there's not some sort of goal. in terms of a race. I think we all had experienced that a little bit in 2020. And still certain parts of the world right now are experiencing that with many race cancellations due to the global pandemic. Maybe that's the best answer for us is it's difficult to keep training for some when there's not a race on the horizon. I know that for me, it's always helped to have something, even if it's like 5 or 6 months away, say like, well, it's time to become very consistent now because you do have that goal 5 months away. That's more of my situation right now where I'm signed up for a couple races for the remainder of the year, like Tunnel Hill, for example. I've been wanting to run Steve Durbin's race for a long time. I'm not sure if I'm going to be in the best physical state to do so or if it makes sense for this year, but I do have a race in February. That personally helps me a lot. Much like the gentleman you're talking about, to have something on the horizon. But even when I don't have something coming up and I know it's coming up, I think that I hit a point where I just get in a regular pattern of training anyway, because I really like being active, the rewards of having a good body composition, the rewards of the endorphins just being in your system. I hit that point in 2020 where I was taking a little time off of training once I knew Western States wasn't going to happen, just a couple weeks down. And then even though I didn't know if there was going to be a race in the fall for me, I just got training and I got really excited about it. And I got super excited about going out my door every day and running again, running at a high volume. And by the time I knew a race was happening, like, whoa, Jason Green's going to let me into Yeti 100. Awesome. Because I'm really fit. I haven't been training for anything, but I got into this race. It looks like it's going to happen and I'm really fit. So knowing that a race was going to happen was great. And it was a bit of a spark for me. But when all races got taken off the docket, like we thought nothing was going to happen in 2020, I think that I had got back to a point where I was just training for the joy of going out and running again. When there's a lot of race options, the external pressure feels, it depends on how you process it. Like, is the race a reward for the hard training you're putting in, or is the race the reason why you're training? So I would love to see more of us get back to the race is the reward for all the time and energy you put into the training. I think that it's a more effective way to get to race day and just have a clear mind and say, well, whatever happens today doesn't so much matter. I'm going to be training anyway. I'm going to be physically active anyway. I think that's a healthier way to approach it, because then even if the racing was removed, it would be like, well, I'm studying, but there's no test, right? It'd be like, and how many people in history became really good at a craft even though there wasn't a test? They just kept going to the library. They kept experimenting in a workshop. They kept working their craft, like carpenters, plumbers, painters, whatever, right? And you become world class at something without there actually being a quote unquote test, I think it makes you more of a tradesman, right? Like, well, what do you do? Well, I run. Oh, like, do you race? Or are you a professional runner? No, I just run. Like, I mean, there are a lot of people out there like that. And I think if we began to shift the focus just collectively, all runners, towards just wanting to get out there every day and being at peace, whether it was in the mountains or doing your road running. And every once in a while you signed up for a race, you'd probably do a lot better at the races because the pressure wouldn't be quite as extreme.
Right. And, I think the other piece of it, and, this often comes up and it's a topic that's heavily discussed, is the reason, the why, right? Like when you're signed up for this goal event, and, in this runner's case, he had just attempted Leadville, and he got to the climb up Hope Pass and realized that he wasn't going to make the cutoff. And, at that point, just kind of shut it down. It's like, I just didn't care, like it didn't really have any fight in him, and it was, we talked about, well, what was the reason that what were you doing this race for? Like, what was your reasoning to get to the finish? And I think when he kind of had time to process it a little bit more, he decided that it was just because he had a DNF there previously and wanted to finish the race. But like, there was no love for the course, the event, anything involved within the event. There wasn't any emotional attachment. It was more just to tick off a box that completed the course. And when it came down to it, that wasn't strong enough, to really drive him. And I mean, the cutoffs, I mean, the race wasn't really set up for success this year, right? You're limited to 2 people, I think it was, right? For, they said, try to keep it at 2 crew people. And then they made the cutoffs harder. So it's like they were making it very difficult for anyone, because I mean, let's take away the altitude, right? That race is
the vert's reasonable.
That hard if it wasn't the altitude,
and,
right?
I was up there pacing. I mean, the terrain is reasonable. There's not much technicality,
right? But because of what it is, it brings in a lot of first-time 100 runners. But we're not creating an environment of success for those beginner runners because of of what just transpired, what they did. Like having 2 crew members and then making cutoffs harder. It's not set up for the beginner type, or in the case.
Well, the cutoff you're talking about too, prior to Hope Pass, right? Like the cutoff at Outward Bound, where you're getting ready to head up Hope Pass, is 26-hour pace, and that's difficult. You have to go out really hard there to actually finish the race. If you're a person that's like 29 hours would be Holland for me. Yeah. You have to go out 3 hours faster than your goal pace through Outward Bound.
Right. Which that's nothing that I would ever recommend to any of my runners, to go out super hard beyond.
And I'm sorry, that
pace in the beginning of 100 miles.
Twin Lakes.
Yeah, and
so you have to go through Twin Lakes in a 26-hour pace. Outward Bound probably even harder. Anyway.
Yeah, thank you. But it just when we started looking at it, I said, he was asking me, should I go back? And the conversation evolved to like, is it because you just DNF'd, or is there another reason? Like, is that going to be enough for you to want to go back? Because we just discussed everything that you and I just discussed. Is this race is not set up for you to succeed. Like, we would have to get you in smashing shape in order to get ahead of those cutoffs. Like, we could do it. We can train for that. But like, is that what you want? Like, is there any other reason? Do you love the course that much? And he's like, no. And so, and then he kind of made the realization. I said, well, we've got a new race director that's coming in. Let's see what changes she makes. If they change the cutoffs and all of that, and see if they make it more of an option for runners such as yourselves and new runners to have more success at this event. Because right now, like, I just, I think it would be, awful, because, altitude does come into play, right? Like, it's an X factor. So we've got these X factors. And so, when we started talking about that, and he started realizing his why really wasn't there for that type of, for this event, that, he could go and complete another 100 and probably enjoy it a whole heck of a lot more and find a more beautiful course. And, the why started evolving. And so, when we talk about why, and we're actually, as my collective group, we're doing our book of the month is Start With Why. It's a book about talking about how do we create these whys. And I think, a lot of times we go into an event just because it is that event, right? It is Western
Which is
States,
not easy,
right? Like, we've made it in, we've made that, we're in that pool, but right, exactly. It's not easy. And, but like you said, do we have that appreciation for the fact that we're in, I mean, for me, it was Hard Rock. Like, I had the appreciation that I was in and was going to do whatever I could to get to that finish line, just because of my gratitude for being in that event. And that was enough for me. It is folks' gratitude for the opportunity, is it enough? And that's where I come in with, my gratitude for being able to run is enough that I don't need a race. 2020, I was okay.
Right.
I mean, I got to race, which was great, but like, I love going out for a run, send me out on a long run. I love it. That's peace for me. That's like, I love the simple act of running. And I think sometimes people just look past that, that it's, I got to train for this event.
Right.
And without that, like, I don't have a why. Whereas if we step back and take a look at the act of running itself and have a piece of gratitude for that simple act, running becomes so much more. Like, we get to enjoy the aspects of it, just being able to be out, going for a run with a friend, or going out into, trails, or, whatever it may be, wherever you are, whatever you do, wherever you enjoy running, just that simple act of saying, this is wonderful in and of itself. I'm appreciative of that, because there's a lot of things out there right now that, there's so many negatives. I find peace by just being able to go out for a run. My son Keegan was like, "Why do you like running so much?" And that was a great question. Like, it took me back. I was like, why do I love running? And, I told him, I said, it just gives me joy. Like, I just love going for a run. I love the solitude sometimes. I love the peace of mind I can find. I can join a friend and we can just have a great conversation. There's so many aspects of running that, I think we take for granted sometimes. And, when we take a step back and reflect on, well, why do I actually like running? I think that's a great question that folks should ask themselves, because then that can evolve into your why.
Yeah.
And, when you get to an event, it becomes simpler and clearer. You have a more stated purpose.
And I think if you're in maybe a little bit of a negative patch with like, you're signing up for events over and over again, and the pressure is getting to you of like, I've got to train, I've got to perform for this thing. Maybe take a little patch where you just go and pace friends at events, right? Or if you're hitting your head against the wall, like, I can't get a 100-mile finish, go and pace a good friend of yours that's experienced at 100 miles for the last 40 miles of their race sometime, and see the things they go through. It's super rewarding, man. Like going and pacing and going and doing other things in the running community. That's super rewarding. And that gets you a little bit back to your why. I think it's a good way to reset. I mean, this trip to Leadville was great for me. I got to support a good friend of mine that came all the way to Western States to supported me. I got to pace him for 25 miles, and it wasn't, they weren't 25 of his best miles ever on the Leadville course. In relative terms, like Ian's won Leadville 4 times. And he had a solid race, but I saw him go through some low patches. I'm like, wow, I didn't think Ian went through patches like this. It was really interesting and really cool to see him fight through those tough times in the race and still trudge on to a finish time that wins a lot of years. He had some great patches and he had some bad patches, but to see a guy as consistent and good as Ian fight through those things, troubleshoot, get himself to the finish line, you can learn a ton from experiences like that as a runner. And I think it gets you back to the why. It's like, well, I'm just out here supporting a friend in this activity, and we happen to be running, and we're going through the woods together. And how enjoyable is that? Like that's something you'll always remember. So if you're struggling a little bit with the why of running and you're just rushing from race to race, go pace for a little while, go volunteer at an event, go pace, like go support a brand really think highly of, like, hey, Goo's always looking for volunteers. You want to go to an event that Goo's sponsoring? They'd love to meet you and have you there, and you could help them work an aid station or help them work an expo, right? So there's things that you can do as a runner that are more than just racing. And I think that gives you more substance in terms of going to an event when it's your time to perform. You feel like more people are behind you. You're putting time into the community as well.
Yeah, totally. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, but I agree with you there.
I also
there is
agree
nothing
more
like
that
volunteering.
The act of running is really the bottom line on why I do it, right? The way I feel after a run, I'm a more positive person. I like the endorphins that are in my system. I feel like a clearer mind, a clearer headspace. I feel like I can attack the tasks of the day. I'm not much of a morning runner, or my days would probably go a lot more smoothly. I'm like, I got my run in. It's like 4 p.m. now. Oh, man, I feel like I could hammer the rest of the night. I'm like, I'm probably gonna go to bed in 5 or 6 hours. Bummer, you know. So I am a little envious of morning runners that get up and get it done, and then have those feelings all day, you know. So if you're looking for a reason to go run, it's going to make your day a lot better, you know. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great place to transition to kind of things we're looking forward to, both this year and in the coming year. And by those, it can be, products, it can be events, it could be, just some weekend experiences with some friends. What are some things that you're looking forward to?
Within the next year, including this year, I'm really looking forward to getting back out to Javelina. I'm gonna go out there and support a bunch of runners that are racing in my collective group, much like yours, Aaron. We've got eight people competing this year. A couple ladies that are super fit, a couple guys that are super fit, that are ready to push their limitations on the course. Nicole Manette, my assistant, and the person that's coaching with me in my program, she's really had a great couple years of ultra running, and she's looking forward to doing her second 100. Lottie Zeiler's kind of a newer one on the scene, and she ran her first 100K at Rocky Raccoon in about 8:47. So we're really excited for her to take a go at the 100-mile distance. But it's going to be just like, Javelina in particular is an event where I get to meet up with a bunch of friends. It's my 5th year in a row at the event, 3 years running, and this will be my 2nd year pacing. I'm either going to be pacing my good friend Eric Sensman if he runs, or Nicole, depending on which one of them run. I've got to return the favor for Eric because he's brought me around the loop 3 times. But I'm just looking forward to getting out there and like supporting the brands I run for, both Hoka and Goo, and the athletes that I coach. It's going to be really fun. And I love pacing. I mean, second to running hundreds, it's my favorite thing to do. I definitely like pacing more than I like running 50Ks, for example. So I'm looking forward to getting back to Javelina. Maybe turning the corner for Tunnel Hill this year. It would be a cool event to run. Within the next year, to kind of continue down the path of events that I'm excited to go to. For next year, I'm planning to do Jackpot again in February. And then the latter of the year, I'm going to run my first Spartathlon as long as I make Team USA. So that's my big goal for next year is, go back to Jackpot. I love the course. I love the event. Cool. Ken and his wife the race directors are awesome. It's interesting. It's 85 laps for 100 miles on a flat loop, and that's definitely my style. So I'm excited to get on a loop like that. I don't think when I tell people that, I don't think many people relate to that or are excited as well. But I am super stoked to be back on that loop and kind of test my limitations there with a really, I'm really fit. And running Spartathlon in the fall is going to be really interesting. I mean, it's point to point from Athens to Sparta. It's 154 miles, so it's the furthest I've ever gone, and it's a lot of road running. So I'm excited. I'm excited for those opportunities in the next year in terms of racing. I think those are going to be really fun. I can't see myself, not going back to events like Javelina and Western next year. I'm not entered in Western states. I'm likely to not have a spot, but I see myself pacing there next year. Like if Kaylee or Nicole happen to get a golden ticket, I'd love to pace one of them next year. I see myself being back at Western States in some capacity and definitely pacing Javelina next year too. Or if I'm wrecked from Spartathlon, maybe just going out and spectating Javelina. So.
Cool. Very cool. That's great. Yeah, I think the one big thing that obviously I'm looking forward to is Hellbender, getting that race back and getting it going again. Yeah, I've kind of been in the trenches here trying to get things up and going, which has been really difficult with everything the Forest Service is going through right now, especially with all of the weather that has affected our area and the trail closures. So it's been really tough to communicate consistently with them. And, by no means do I fault them. They have been extremely busy and taxed by what's going on. So, at the same token, I've kind of tried to get it, back out there and help with trail maintenance. So, that's always something that's kind of close to my heart. Right now, a lot of it is just kind of going out and seeing the trails and kind of reporting back to what we find. With this new storm that just came through, they try to limit who goes in and how often. Just because of the dangers that could be present. So it's been kind of an on and off again. So, and I also have a good friend that went up and managed my section of the mountains to see. So I need to return the favor and get out there and do some work with him. It's going to take a lot on the Hellbender side of things to make sure those trails stay in good condition. So a lot of work to do, but I'm really looking forward to bringing that back and getting it on its feet and rolling again. I know a lot of people are excited by it, and I can't wait to have the family back. And see everybody again. It's
for sure.
Just like
and it's your baby.
A lot of the events.
This is your 100, right?
Been,
like
too long.
Creator here,
and I think it's going to be. Yeah, it's going to be an emotional pre-race meeting, that's for sure, and I'll be excited when I get to say go. So that's the big thing that I really look forward to next year. For my athletes, just like you, I've got a ton that are doing Yeti here in 2 weeks or 3 weeks time. That it's coming up quick, but there's a ton of them that are doing it. So I really look forward to their experiences and seeing how they do. Because so many of them have trained so hard for this, and it's really cool event. So I think Jason does a wonderful job, and it's a great first timer, and a lot of them are first timers. So I hope they find their finish lines. And then personally, I look forward to the lotteries.
Yeah.
Two big ones obviously are Western and then Bigfoot 200, whichever. If I don't get into either, then we take that next step. But I certainly look forward to those. Those are a big anticipation for those. And then just kind of watching the kids go. Ambryn will be running next year, so she gets into her first year of cross country next year, and Keegan started his high school season this year, and he's got a big race this weekend. So kind of fun to watch them and see this next generation coming up and what they're doing, as well as coaching these young kids. Doing the middle school coaching has been really inspiring and joyful. Like I really. I wondered how coaching that age group would be, and it's been nothing but joyful, and it makes me feel younger. So I really enjoy that aspect as well. So 2022, obviously we don't know what's going to go on, but
I can't wait
like
to
we have some
in
great
December.
To look forward to, and I hope that's the reality.
And with the Bigfoot lottery, which events are slated for you for next year. I mean, that's gonna give us a better scope of, hey, what the heck are we training for next year? I mean, like we discussed, like you're going to be training regardless, but what are we training for? Is it going to be your first Western States? And I know that, well, hey, you may have a pacer there from Forest Hill to the river, right? Or somebody to pick you up at Bath Road. Maybe me and Morgan could share some duties for you next year too. I mean, that would be incredible, to share that experience together.
That's right.
I should have mentioned Yeti too. I mean, I think Jason puts on a spectacular race. I've got some runners running there as well. Almost lapsed with how close it is, but it's going to be super exciting to see how the race goes down this year. I think they have a great field, and I'm sure a lot of people are just looking forward to trying to get that cool 24-hour buckle at Yeti. It's a pretty awesome one with the rainbow, and Jason's like so welcoming, like he has such a good community up there. We chatted the other day, and I know he's excited that it's going to fire off this year and feel a little bit more normal. so many people vaccinated, and we're in a good spot. How do you feel about running your first 200? It's something that more and more athletes seem like they're proposing to me. Like, it's something I want to do, right? Or like Tiger, for example. Like, I've been coaching her for a couple of years, and she's had great success at 200s. She finished Cocodona. She Bigfoot as well. How do you feel about the 200? And why is it something that attracts you, right? Like, I think we're both attracted to these long events. Like, Spartathlon is really long. I've looked at Moab for a couple of years and been like, at what point does it make sense to try to enter that, right? Like, you're now talking about entering Bigfoot. What attracts you to something longer than 100?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, the first thing was just where it is, that Pacific Northwest. I've never seen Mount St. Helens. I remember the news when it erupted, and we lost half of Mount St. Helens. I remember that news clip. I remember where I was. I remember the TV. I remember, just the awe that we were in. And so, going to see that area, it's been kind of a magnetic draw. Like, I really want to experience that area. And I think, races typically are my way of doing that. And what better way to experience it than doing something long like that? Now, I've never I can never say that I've really mastered the 100-mile. I don't know if you ever do master 100 miles, but it's always something that has created a challenge within me because, I was always more on the speed side of things growing up. So, these longer distances has always been a challenge to me, and I've always loved facing challenges head on. And, I think, while 200 miles is quite daunting, I think it's still, it's a journey and something that I really look forward to, seeing what 200 miles on foot feels like. Not that I want to try to go out there and just crush my first one. I just want to go out there and experience what it's like to be, going through those challenges, having to figure out sleep and food and, just managing my effort. So yeah, I think it's, it's definitely, one that I'll take more seriously than I have anything previously, but one that I really will look forward to again because of the location, the folks involved. It's a cool community. Candace has done a great job with that, with those events and creating such an amazing community, and everybody seems to be behind one another.
Yeah.
It's whereas we get into a 50K and it's like almost like a free for all. You move up in distance and it becomes more of a community effort, more of a collaborative rather than an individual experience. So, I enjoy that aspect of the 100, and I think it becomes even stronger. It's a very particular type of
person that decides to sign up for a 200-mile race. Someone that says, the 100 is not quite enough for me, which, we must question our psychological well-being at that point, right? Like, 100 miles on foot is a significant distance. Like, Carl would say it's not that far, and I would say, yeah, it's not that far, right? Like, you normalize it, but the 200 is a little different. It seems very difficult to normalize it. Folks that have like Michael McKnight or Courtney, I think about people that do a lot of them, people that do them all the time. There's a whole community. It does seem like a different atmosphere, and even more so, like you said, about collectively, how many people can we get to the finish line here? It's not about my individual goals necessarily. It's way more about experiencing this whole event because it's days and days and days. It's fascinating. I think each of Candace's races too are quite unique in that one is at altitude, one is at Mount St. Helens, one is around beautiful Moab with way far more runnable terrain and far less vert. It's pretty fascinating to see the series that she's developed, and how much they attract the individual runners. There's also the unique aspect of the buckles she creates, right? That each is a little different. She provides a really cool experience, and I'm excited for you to be able to experience that.
Yeah. It's, I think, like we talked about earlier, that's just, not necessarily the more miles, the merrier, but it's just, again, it's the chance to run and to experience new places and meet new folks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a lot of times why we do, races. We get to experience new trails. We get to experience, new friends, and collect memories, So, I just look forward to getting cozy with my poles and, and experiencing a new distance. And that's, I think that's what running has always been for me, is just, experiencing new distances and experiencing new places. It's taken me some great places. I like Ambrin, my daughter, was asking me the other day, like, when are we going back to UTMB? And it just made me smile. I mean, what, yeah. I mean, there's just so many unique experiences out there, and it's, I both admire and also question those that do the same event year after year, because there's just so much out there. But at the same time, there's something to be said for those that really found a passion, for the gentleman that just finished his 25th Hard Rock.
Right.
You kind of say it was 2 or 3 not enough, but at the same time, when you go out and experience the loop, you can say, well, I can see how you could fall in love with this and want to do it year after year, especially since the atmosphere around it is just so welcoming and so embracing. So I can totally see that. Western States, same thing. I can see, having experienced the crewing and the crewing side of it in 2019. It's it is. It's
I think Western States
event, and
heavily
you want to be a part of it.
For me, the ones I've experienced probably the most and the most directly. It's far more about the community surrounding that race that keeps drawing me back. Right, like I know Ian, for example, is like, Western States is his thing, right? Like Leadville is his thing. He's zoned in on 10 Leadville finishes, I think I'm a little bit more on your end of the spectrum, where I'm trying to figure out, okay, how can I experience Rocky Raccoon, Umstead, Old Dominion? Wow, these events are all so close to each other. I want to experience kind of all the classic American hundreds, all the cool international races. How do you fit them all into one season without overdoing it when it's season? And that's more the question for me. Like, okay, how do I assemble the funds for going to Marathon des Sables?
Yeah.
And how do it's just like, I want to do all these cool races around the globe that have different footing, different settings. That's more what it's all about, is experiencing cool places around the globe.
Yep.
I'd like to also highlight a couple cool things. We talked about maybe touching on some awesome current events that are going on in our sport. Before the call, we had first talked about the evolution of the Western States Golden Ticket Series. And me and you being total fanboys of the sport, we've been really excited to see the adaptations. And I think it adds a greater breadth to how you can qualify for Western States. An interesting factor is that the top 2 finishers of UTMB will get invites to Western States this year. And I wonder how many of those will take it. And if one thing that I'm really excited about is that if Francois or the second place finisher at UTMB don't decide to take it, my buddy Mathieu Blanchard, Canadian guy, he got 3rd at UTMB. It was just like a huge evolution for him as an athlete. I saw him 2nd at Tarawera. We raced in the same race. We did the Tongariro crossing together in New Zealand when we raced Tarawera. Got to know each other pretty well. And I know that if one of those guys turns it down, Mathieu is going to get to run his first Western States. So I'm really excited for him. I thought that was one of the coolest moments of UTMB for me personally, was seeing him do so well there. So I hope one of the guys turns it down so it rolls to Mathieu. I have a feeling Francois, he's run Western States a handful of times, and I think he has probably other races on his mind. Another key finish, I think, at the UTMB series for me, the way I saw it was, I was so impressed with Emily Hawgood's like durability from Zimbabwe. She ran 3 golden ticket races to get into Western States, finally getting in at Canyons. 300 Ks, I think she ended up 7th at Western States. Had a really good race,
yeah.
and turned around and was 10th at UTMB. I'm super impressed by her. She was a athlete at College of Idaho. Matt Lay is a professor there. And she was an NAI athlete that was kind of always like on the edge of making the top 7 for the College of Idaho team. They're a super quality program. I think she probably made a few national championship meets like in the top 7, but I believe was more like an 30 minute 5K in college. So she's really found her knack for the sport. Emily Hoghead she's just someone I'm super impressed with this year. I'm interested.
That's cool. I think she was just on Talk Ultra. I think she just had an interview on Talk Ultra. Is she on the Asterix team? Yeah. So Ian Corliss just had an interview with her, which was great. So if you guys look,
what impressed you most about
one of the most
UTMB
recent
this year?
episodes?
What were the highlights
Talk
for you?
Ultra? You'll find that. Oh man. Yeah, Francois. I mean, coming off of Hard Rock and coming back and winning UTMB in a such a amazing fashion, because those guys went out hard, and to see that he was able to sustain and then come out on top, it's just incredible, that his just fortitude and I mean, from what he did at Hard Rock, let alone, I mean, that stands out as, probably, it has to be the top performance just based on his course record. That's like amazing to run faster in the counterclockwise direction and break the overall course record when the clockwise direction is the faster direction. So, I mean, and to break it by 2 hours, that's insane. And it was killing his record. That's amazing. And so coming off a Hard Rock and then coming back to an event like UTMB, granted, UTMB is definitely a more runnable course, but still has the same amount of elevation gain as Hard Rock. That was a phenomenal performance. And then to see obviously Courtney come back from her GI distress issues at Hard Rock, but then to run the race she had at UTMB and to finish 6th overall. I mean, that's I mean, and to run the time she did, Rory's time was incredible, and for her to break that. That's just, especially with the year they had with the weather this time. I mean, they were told they had to have the winter kit, in that 24-hour window. And to have the night they did, I mean, and Courtney was prepared for it. From what I hear, she had the glasses this time, and they were doing the eye wash so that they didn't get the snow blindness or the ultra eye blindness, I guess they call it. But yeah, I mean, those were phenomenal. Just both winners like stood out as that's amazing performances. I mean, it was incredible also to see the top 5 be French. The French nationality, like that stood out as well. Like in the men's side, I didn't expect to see that. So we had top 5 French, and then German,
I mean,
and then Courtney.
Ludovic, Ludo continued to show like his consistency there really, as well, moving well all day, like prowess, having a good sense of humor along the route. Like every time he was in an aid station, there was a reporter there. You're like, wow, Ludo's just cracking jokes. Like he's so good at this distance, All those guys just look so composed. Yeah, it was incredible to see. In the CCC, I thought my boy Chris Brown had just such a great race, moved up patiently all day, and him and Avery Collins were kind of in the same neighborhood. Avery looks so stoked for his finish, Beast Coaster migrated west. Avery, shout out to Avery Collins for sure.
Yeah.
I was really, really impressed by Abby Hall's second place finish after, I know a disappointing Western States, like she went out there and just nailed it. That was super cool to see in the CCC. The TDS, we had some, an unfortunate like passing of an athlete, which, set the tone for the week. Just super fitting, of course. Hayden Hawksrun in the OCC, absolutely. Probably another one of the top Americans, like to get 5th and 520. Aaron, I've run 553 on that course, and that's not easy to think about 520. It's nuts. 520 and 5th. That was the craziest thing. Like record went down. So
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Especially, that close proximity to his finish at Western States. That was, it
Sure.
seemed that a lot of the Americans on the male side
Sure.
tended to have a lot more difficulty, with coming back from Western. But on the
sure.
women's side, not
I can see
there
here
were
on the
obviously
Western States Golden Ticket
some difficulties,
races
but it seems
thread
the women rebounded a lot
on the
better.
official site now that Courtney and Camille Bruyas have accepted their entry. So Courtney's going to be racing Western States, it looks like, next year, and same with Camille, but it says men pending. So that'll be interesting to see who accepts.
Oh,
Our next, I'm not sure.
awesome.
I'm not sure how many days you have to let them know within. It has to be a pretty.
Do they have a time
though? I would have to imagine. The next event up we have in the Golden Ticket Series, this is a pretty interesting one, and I think it's also been extended in terms of distance a bit, is Templier. So that'll be in France, and on October 24th, we've got our second Golden Ticket race coming up quickly. It's cool to see the international races.
Oh, wow.
And the one following that being Javelina 100 miler.
Yeah.
So this will be our first 100-mile Golden Ticket in quite a while.
Absolutely.
Rocky Raccoon used to be a Golden Ticket race. So it's going to be really cool to see people now be able to qualify again from the 100-mile distance. I've got total FOMO here that that I'm not on the Javelina starting line this year, but it's going to be cool to see it go down and be such a deep competitive race. The start list just looks crazy. In addition to Black Canyon, the Canyons, and Bandera, which are usually Golden Ticket races, we also have Tarawera, the 100K. So that'll be our third opportunity for international athletes to qualify for Western States. Mm-hmm. So, we tend to get a lot of American athletes going over there that time of the year to run Tarawera, but hopefully we get some other international entries as well. So this series just looks super cool. I like the way it's evolved a little bit. I really like that you have to run at least 100K to qualify for Western States. I think it's a good evolution. I would even like to see more 100 milers, but
Yeah, I know. It seems right that you should run 100 to get in there. Sometimes and this is just personal feeling, is that if you're going to run your first 100 as Western, it doesn't feel right. To me, it's it's luck of the draw. I get that, but it almost feels like you should have to have a 100-mile experience, and maybe that would limit the field a little bit more, or not limit the field, but limit the capacity of the lottery.
Yeah, I like that they're quite early, like UTMB and Javelina being quite early.
You can only run so many hundreds
from Western
States. I get that as well.
Proof in the pudding kind of shows that you can run those events and do really well at Western the next year.
Right. You got plenty of time.
If you were to look at for example, like Devin Yanko, myself, there's plenty of turnaround time between October Javelina all the way to the summer. Race that Hal Kerner's run and done really well at, and done well at States. Zach Bitter's another example of a guy that's done well there and then done well at States the following year. We've had a lot of athletes, like Casey, for example, nailing Javelina, plenty of turnaround time to take some rest and build back into the season. So I think Javelina is an excellent decision. It also gives you a good idea of who are good, which runners are good heat runners. If you can run well at Javelina, you can develop the ability to climb and descend with a little bit more technicality, a little bit more single track, and run well at States. I think proof is in the pudding there for sure. Other current events, I'm really intrigued and interested to see where the career of Alexander Sorokin goes. The Lithuanian man who broke Zach Bitter's record and Jonas Guris's record, all within the past 6 months. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating to look at it and say he's run 11:14 for 100 miles now.
Yeah,
he's won Spartathlon, he's won the 24-hour World Championships, and now he ran 308 kilometers. To best Giannis Corus's 24-hour world record. I mean, we're talking 192.x miles. You know, that record, I think, was something people looked at and said, wow, this may never get broken. And it's fascinating to see that within a 6-month period, 8-month period, like he's broke both of the kind of like unreachable records.
Right. Yes. Absolutely. That's going to be, he's going to be someone to watch. And, I mean, I don't know his background prior to this, but I mean, those records, especially the 24-hour record, I think that one was the one that everybody was like, who's going to be able to touch that? I mean, we had
Taggart Van
it's the young man that went after the treadmill record, and then he tried to do the 24-hour. Taggart, thank you. Yeah, Taggart. He was going to go after it, and he still may. But I think he realized he needed something a little bit more, a smaller event, if you will, because I think he tried to do it in 6 days in the Dome, and it was just too many people for him to pass and move around. So I think he's looking for smaller numbers to try to do something like that. But he's obviously has the capacity to win or to set the treadmill record. It would be interesting to see what he could do with the overall 100-mile record.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible.
And then perhaps the 24-hour record. But
to relate to it is a little difficult. Having run
oh my gosh,
12:21 for 100 miles, to think about 11:14 is unbelievable. And having crawled to 130 in 24 hours to look at 192 is kind of like, wow. I mean, that's an incredible number of miles within a 24-hour period. We're talking about your first 200, and we're looking at this guy and we're like, wow, he almost covered 200 in 24. I mean, it's really hard to believe that he averaged. I mean, we're talking his average was 94 miles. No, 96. He averaged 96 for each of his 12 hours. I mean,
that's incredible.
It's unbelievable to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other East Coast race that I'm looking forward to is going to be JFK. That field is going to be. I have some locals here in Western North Carolina that are going, and it's just I think the entry list is going to be fun to watch what happens at JFK. I think a lot of times that race gets overlooked, but it does draw such a great elite field. And, whereas, it's not obviously the fastest course, Tunnel Hill is definitely faster, but it definitely draws a great field as well. So I look forward to seeing what happens at JFK this year. Not that, if we don't see a course record, it's still going to be a real competitive race. And
it's such a good blend of
the
technicality.
East Coast field is going to be
and flatter running.
Great to see. So
technicality that a lot of runners outside of our region aren't particularly used to as well, Aaron. Like the Appalachian Trail section is not the smoothest, and it, I think, takes some people by surprise. And you also need insane leg speed to do well on that towpath, right? I mean, we've had guys run 232, 234 on the men's side, like in the marathon in the middle of JFK. So you need to be quite fast. That's after you have 19 miles in your legs too. So I think that we now have no North Face 50 for now. It's going to be kind of one of the more marquee events that time of the year. In November, a lot of the international races are starting to kind of wind down. There's going to be maybe a little bit more focus there, a little bit more focus on Tunnel Hill, a little bit more focus on Javelina 100 now, especially that it's a golden ticket race. And I think this is going to be a great year to see what goes down at Desert Solstice too. I'm a big fan of the flat stuff, flat non-technical stuff. And I'm definitely licking my chops to see who requalifies for the team. We've got a few dogs in the fight in my coaching program, and Jake Jackson is just such a stud at the 24-hour distance. It's going to be really cool to see what Jake does in December at Desert Solstice, among others that are just prolifically consistent, like Nick Curry. Bob Hearn's on quite a run after his Strolling Gym, and it'll be really interesting to see can Bob get that mark that's required for the team. He's missed by such narrow margins in the past. I'm excited to see who else goes back to the 24-hour distance. Does Courtney take another shot at Desert Solstice in hopes to get back on the team? I think the 24-hour discipline is just so interesting, and it'll be cool to see what kind of big marks we get at Desert Solstice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it will be. Our U.S. team has always been quite strong, but to see who's the young guns that are coming up, and will there be a change of the guard? We've had a number of the gentlemen that have been repeat team members. So will we get some new members on there, and who's going to make a name for themselves at Desert Solstice, and then what will the rest of the season look like for that qualifying period? What will we see if things don't go according to plan for some of the former team members? Where will they go, and where will they try to qualify, and how much will they try to get? It's getting amazing to see.
Yeah, it's unbelievable to think about that. Like
157 miles, it might not cut.
I wouldn't bet against Olivier, right? Olivier LeBlanc.
That's incredible to think about
to requalify, and I feel similar about Jake. I feel similar about Nick Curry in terms of his consistency at that discipline. Right. But what is going to be the mark? Does it take 165 on the men's team? Does it take 155 plus on the women's team to qualify from now on? I think with just more runners getting involved in the sport, more high level athletes, we're seeing people become really focused on a particular discipline. Like, okay, this is my avenue, and that's the trajectory. Like, I've personally seen myself on too, Aaron, is just like, I want to become a little bit more focused on what I know I'm super good at, flatter, more runnable stuff. And I think that just increases the breadth of our sport and increases sort of like the general respect for the different categories of ultra running. There are so many different avenues you could take. The more of us that are focusing on events within our speciality and not just reaching for one particular event, everybody's trying to get in one event. I think that'll diversify the sport even more. Yeah. No, it's, I mean, there's so many different, like you said, so many formats now. We've got the backyard formats that are exploding. Obviously the 24-hour, and then we, obviously have mountain ultra. We have, more faster, flatter, just, 100-mile races. It's just, it seems the growth of the sport has encouraged creativity into the format of the event, which is really cool. I came from a day where it was just, you sign up for a trail race, and it wasn't really thought as to, what type of training went into it. Now it's, we're getting very specific, especially at the elite level, as to, people specializing. Like Francois obviously is, a dominant mountain racer. Whereas, Walmsley, he has success at moderately mountain races, but hasn't quite pulled off the success at those, truly mountain races. So, it's, I don't want to define Jim as, one type of runner, but, we're seeing success come in these, more specific style of events. So, and people are finding that niche. But it is cool to see the athletes that do have the range. Totally. That's a big range, right? Like he also has the marathon on the low end, the steeplechase on the low end.
And then come back and
maybe he's seeing that he's more similar to like Max Gang than he is to Francois or maybe he commits himself, totally to UTMB and just goes there and runs 1930 though. and that's possible too, right? Like, I think it's just difficult to nail Western and come back to nail UTMB.
And that's what I would love to see. Yeah, I would love to see that. I agree. Yeah, I agree. Those are two very, different races, and they are two, they're in proximity. So it's a really tough turnaround
Totally.
because, as we were talking about earlier, the specificity that goes into training for Western is quite different than what you would need for UTMB. So, I mean, the leg turnover is, going to be a lot more for Western, whereas you need a lot more climbing legs for UTMB. Not that you don't need some climbing legs for Western, but, they're a little bit further apart on the training spectrum. But yeah, it's I think you're right. It's, you really have to focus on one or the other. It's, focus on Western to especially at Jim's level to compete for the win there, or focus on because I mean, Francois obviously coming off Hard Rock, that's quite specific. And if we look at Francois' training leading up to Hard Rock, he really just went there, I think maybe 2 months prior to really start his run centric training, and then train specifically for Hard Rock. So he didn't have a massive running buildup for Hard Rock, which I think allowed him to continue his fitness up into UTMB because it was kind of a nice continuum. Whereas Jim,
it's a
unfortunately,
difficult transition,
his
especially when you're coming off of like
Western, and then he kind of had to switch gears and try to train up
January,
for UTMB.
Right? Like we're talking,
that's a hard transition.
Well, Francois was skiing the whole year, like, Jim's kind of coming off of a big period of running, and probably pretty similar with Tim Tolson too, where like he probably ran a lot more in the wintertime compared to Francois as well. Like I know he does some ski mode too, but it's just difficult to come back and nail those two. That double is difficult. We've seen very few athletes pull it off with great success. Even the years where, if you consider like, okay, Jim nailed, Jim was fifth there,
right?
His first go, but his states wasn't great. Remember, like I believe that year, that was his wrong turn year, right? And even Courtney, the first time she won, she had that unfortunate DNF at states. So there was kind of like, we haven't seen an athlete at the very highest level for a while, like win both. Has there ever been? I'm not sure. Maybe the year that Killian won both. So,
right. Yeah. And we have to look back. Yeah, I couldn't. I couldn't tell you.
I'm glad we got to do some current events here at the end. It's nice.
I mean, the sport's in a great place.
Today was fun to chat all sorts of different concepts with her, and I really enjoyed going back and forth and discussing all sorts of cool things going on in the sport.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Pat. I really appreciate your time here, buddy. And thanks for sharing everything. I'm sure everybody listening really appreciates you, and
thanks, buddy.
Obviously wishes you extreme well in the future and in Tunnel Hill and, whatever 2022 may bring for you. So thanks, buddy. I'd like to once again thank Patrick for coming on the podcast and sharing not only his time, his knowledge, being a great ambassador for the sport. He really does try to educate, share, and make the running world a better place. As cliche as that sounds, but I really enjoy working with Patrick as a coach, as a friend. He's just a genuinely good person. So thank you, Patrick, again for everything, and good luck this fall and everything you're doing. And for here, Labor Day kind of threw a monkey wrench into my plans to get the newsletter out, so I'm a little bit behind on that. My apologies, but the newsletter will be coming out. The September monthly newsletter. You can subscribe at mrrunningpains.com if you're interested, and it has all sorts of tips and reviews and stories, everything. I try to pour a lot into the newsletter, so that is to come. So stay tuned for that. Got a great podcast coming up. It involves one of my athletes, Mercedes. She just finished 5th female at the Lake Sonoma 50 miler. Very proud of her, and look forward to that conversation and hearing about her journey and what she's been learning. And she's a fantastic human being. And she crewed me at Hard Rock. She was one of my crew members, so I got to know her a lot better there. And just a really awesome person. I spent the day running around cheering for her boyfriend, Morgan Elliott, at the Ragged Mountain 50K. So she's just awesome. So look forward to that conversation with her. That'll be next week's episode. Also, just a reminder, the Hellbender 100-mile race, we now have a podcast. So should be available on all listening platforms if you want to subscribe to the Hellbender 100 race podcast. And I just released podcast episode number 2 this past Saturday with the North Carolina High Peaks Association. Jake Blood was my interviewee, and we talked about what they do to help maintain and keep the trails open for much of the Hellbender course. So hope you'll have a listen there. Also, a Facebook page. There is a new Facebook page for the Hellbender 100, as well as an Instagram account. Registration will open November 1st for the race, with a race date of May 6th and 7th of 2022, starting at Camp Greer. So, again, tune into the podcast. Lots of updates and great interviews there. We're going to release that twice a month, the first and third Saturday of each month. So please subscribe to that, as well as like and follow the Facebook and Instagram accounts. So, things are moving along there, which is tremendous, and I'm glad to be back a part of it. So, other news, coaching, I will have a lot of athletes kind of finishing up their goal events, so I should have some spots opening up. If you're looking for coaching within the next few months, perhaps for even a 2020 race, or even just to have a conversation to see if coaching is right for you, happy to have that conversation. Again, my contact will be in the show notes. And if you want to learn more about my coaching services philosophy, it is all on my website, mrrunningpains.com. So please visit there. My contact's also on the website. As always, thank you guys for listening, for being a part of this. I couldn't do it without you guys. You guys give me the motivation to bring on some awesome guests and have these interviews and try to learn something more from our great sport and become better runners and better people. So thank you, my friends. I hope you enjoy and keep running.